about 4 o'clock Sunday stories. There we go. It's a minute to go, or just under. And what I want to talk about today will be the joy of being a storyteller and also health problems, which for me is at the moment, a really touchy subject. And then I'll finish off. I want to talk about Ukraine. But there it is, 4 o'clock Sunday stories. The joys of being a storyteller. Back this weekend at Tudor World in Stratford, I had two reasonable sized groups. One of around about 10 or 11 people, the other one just blossomed into about 20, full house. And there were different emotions that came from both those sets of people. Obviously, they were strangers to each other. The first group were quite difficult to connect with, to get into conversation with. Even as I go round Tudor World and I'm telling the history of the house and all the people that died there, and I'm trying to make it as entertaining as and educational as I can, I do have, I think, moments of humour in there, which with the first group didn't really get the feedback that I was hoping for. And it's a dynamic, isn't it? We talk about the effect that other people can have on us and the effect that we can have on other people. Halfway through the tour, I knew that they were not really connecting with me. Oh, they were interested, certainly. But there's that, you want that little bit of participation. And there were three ladies in particular who, although very, very interested, had all the way through faces that were quite stone-like, quite stoic. And that's the worst of all. But then, when I took them into the barn at Shreve House, Tudor World, and we talked about Jane Ward, the Witch of Sheep Street. I told them a Jane Ward's story, and then about how 15 years ago, 16 years ago now, 11 white witches and two of their leaders came into the barn to perform a ritual. And when they went into the changing room, the first two that came out saw an apparition, a figure in the doorway, a cloak with no eyes, no face, just two burning eyes. And they did run back into the room and they deliberated, excuse me, and eventually called all the Covens of Warwickshire to come and perform a cleansing ritual. Now, the story goes that from that day to this, Jane Ward has never been seen again. And that could be the end of the story. But I go on to start to look at each woman in turn and say, is your name Jane? No. Your name Jane? No. Your name Jane? No. Your name Jane? No. Is your name Jane? Yes. And what an opportunity then to bring the audience in to the performance by acting really, really shocked and oh God, but talking to their partners, saying, "Are you sure you really should be there?" And it is taken as it should be taken, as a little bit of comedy, and that brings them back on board just about when they're about to leave. But the second group, the 20, man, I tell you, right from the off, they were there with me. They were participating. They were joining in with the laughter. They felt emotion for the man I'd put at the back with the lantern. Because you wouldn't like to be at the back of a ghost tour, would you? Or would you? And so as we went round, that different dynamic came out between the audience and the storyteller. And then right at the end, it was pretty loud applause. Now, I've got a man who I follow a lot, and he's got a saying that money is the silent applause for a job well done. And it is. But applause is the noisy applause for a job well done. And when you get that applause, it feels good. It gives you a boost. It tells you that for that hour, you've done your job. And so that's one part of my week. Let's see who's on it. Tony, aren't you out at the Speedway, mate? Good to see you. The second part of the story is my health. For over 2 or 3 years now, I've been getting tingling in the legs. And at night, often it is so infuriating, so aggravating, scratching with my fingers and sometimes my feet to try and relieve the itching. And I read up on it, and it could be a symptom of neuropathy, which leads to often many more quite worse outcomes. So I went to the doctor, and for some reason I had to give some toenails in. I don't know whether this is related, but I had to give some toenail clippings in. And I got the message back this week that I am low in folic acid. And so the doctor has prescribed me 3 months folic acid. And I've took the first 5 courses so far. And I have to say that at night, I'm not suffering the same amount of itching in the legs. But what has been happening now is that I've been waking up, or not even waking up, over the past 3 days, certainly, maybe even 4, my shoulders aching. It's not a hurt, they're not in pain now. But when I go to lift something around the traps and everywhere there, it feels a pain that doesn't come from the sort of pain I've felt when I've done a heavy back or shoulder workout. My hips are aching. And when I stand up, my thighs ache. My wrists ache. And my thumb aches. And I'm tired. And it's only started happening since I took these pills. And you know, what are they? They're about that big. And you start to wonder what the hell sort of effect can a pill that big have on you. I'll have to keep going. Obviously, I'll take at least 1 month of the course. But it makes you wonder about what the side effects are of the medicines we're taking to clear up the first problem. I am, as some people know, a therapist, shiatsu and an exercise therapist. I do know a lot about herbs. I know a lot. I know quite a bit about herbs and their medicinal compounds. But they're pretty hard to get. They're quite expensive. And making them naturally is a lot of painful hard work in terms of time. But where do you draw the line? Where do you make the choice between taking the medicines that the doctor prescribes and then perhaps going and looking at some of the natural medicines? At the moment, as I say, I'm going to have to stick with what the doctor prescribed, but say particularly in the back and the hips, around the kidneys, which is worrying for me. I've not had pain or discomfort like this before. So it'll be worth looking at, won't it? And finally, for the last couple of minutes, that's me. What's the world news? I'm on Substack now, and I write articles periodically. And if you want to learn more about my Substack program, my Substack channel, come on and I can connect you. But there are stories about Ukraine. And one particular story I saw was about the German tanks being sent out to Ukraine, which are top of the range. Absolute gems with night vision. So that as a shot has been fired, and of course nowadays that is done automatically, lock on target, the driver or the commander can be looking for the next target. And it's been quite successful apparently, except that they've only got about 22 of these tanks. And the particular writer wanted to know, or wanted the Americans, the Germans, and the rest of the NATO nations to send more of the more modern tanks and equipment. And I know that by talking about this, people are going to say, well, I'm pro-Russian. No, but I have seen the story from both sides. And I'm talking to people, listening to people who are going more deeply into the situation. And one of them said today that Ukraine is sending messages to the other European nations and asking the other nations to extradite the young men who have fled Ukraine and gone into Germany, Holland, Poland, Hungary, it's wherever, England. And they're asking those countries to extradite them to go back to Poland because they've dodged the draft. Which is interesting because that means that Ukraine is running out of men to fight the war. And they're also apparently either calling back or they're stopping women from leaving the country now. Which is even more frightening, isn't it? If they're going to start using a lot more of their women in the war zones. The only alternatives, of course, is for NATO to ramp up their supply of weapons and training of men to Ukraine, which is, let's face it, declaring war on Russia. Or it's the nuclear option. I ask a question, where do we want the war to stop? Do we want it to stop on the Ukraine-Russian border? Because the problem is, particularly in the Donbass region and Mariupol, as far as I know, the people around there are progressively more pro-Russian. And if Ukraine does take that area of the country, which contains one of the major ports, is that just another flashpoint? And you start to ask yourself where the end game is. You start to listen to people talking about BlackRock, an international company, being given the contract to rebuild Ukraine. And people are speculating that it's in BlackRock's interest for as much damage to be done in Ukraine as possible. So that's the situation at the moment. And do we know that in England? I don't think we do. I don't think we've been told that. I don't think we're being told that Ukraine is demanding that we send Ukrainian men back. Let me know what you think. And if we are still here next week, Sunday at 4 o'clock, let's have a conversation. Take care all. Have a good day.